Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session in the Digital Health Commercialization Seminar Series, which is co-sponsored by the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health and the Brown Technology Innovations Office. My name is Allison Seeley. I am the project coordinator for educational initiatives at the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health, where one of our strategic priorities is helping to develop the future of the digital health workforce through programming and events like the one that you are all attending today. I'm going to be one of your moderators, and I will invite our co-moderator to introduce herself in just a second. If this is the first session that you're attending as a part of the series, welcome. In this series, we are exploring the process of bringing digital health innovations to market. Over the past month, we've had speakers with expertise on intellectual property, regulatory pathways, market access, designing and evaluating digital health tools, and then pitching a product. So whether you're, excuse me, whether you're someone who is ready to pursue commercialization or you're just considering the pathways for scaling your innovations, we hope that you will take something valuable away from these series. To stay up to date on the sessions that are coming up over the next, well, our last session, which is coming up in a week, I'm going to go ahead and chat a link to everybody if you want to join our listserv so that you can get those updates. Before jumping in, I also would like to let everyone know that this session is captioned. So we have a captioner for the seminar today. To see captions, if you click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should be able to see those in Zoom. And then I also chatted a link where you can see the live stream text of what we're talking about today. So at this point, I'm going to invite Melissa to go ahead and introduce herself and then our guest speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Simon, and I'm a Director of Business Development with Brown Tech Innovations, which is Brown's tech transfer office. So for today's session, we're thrilled to welcome Justin Sirotin. So Justin Sirotin is the founder of OCTO Product Development. He's an entrepreneur, design strategist, and expert in product development and innovation. And he spent his 25+ year career developing successful products, services, brand experiences, and businesses for multinational brands and startups. So the presentation will be about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll leave questions for the end, but feel free to add questions in the chat or raise your hand as we go along. We'll try to note that. So welcome, Justin, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, everybody. First, just a sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody can see me okay? Great. Okay, so I've prepared some content, which is sort of a direct lift from a lot of the work that we do in our practice, and then added some examples at the end that hope to provide some tangible components of this for you, so that you have some takeaways that are not just me talking and not just screens that you look at, because we're all staring at far too many screens for far too long these days. So one just minor adjustment to what Allison said, which is feel free to interrupt with questions as I go. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end. If you have a question about something that's on screen, the best and easiest time to ask that is while it's still on screen, rather than cataloging or holding those questions until we get to the end and then trying to recall back to what we were talking about 20, 30 minutes prior. So feel free to interrupt. You will not, I will not be bothered at all. So if you have a question, drop it in the chat or raise your hand, and then Allison's going to help me, because once I put up the full presentation, it's hard for me to see what's happening in the chat. So without further ado, you're all going to get to see yourselves here for a second, because I'm going to share my whole desktop in order to make this work. This is as multimedia as a single digital thing can get. So I've got a few screens open so that I can take you through a couple of different variations. So I got this in advance, which of course the filter's not going to let you see it, but this is the digital health pitch competition submissions form. And so I received this before we went through this. I will freely admit it is impossible to create a piece of content that provides each of you with something really close to what you're working on, because there's so much variety to this. But I will say I found a few things that I was trying to point directly at various ideas that were in here. I happen to know a few of you who are on this call. So from that standpoint, hopefully there's something that you can take away that's tangible. So I'm going to do a quick overview of us and our company, and then we're going to dive right in and spend the vast majority of the time just talking specifically about ideas for managing risk. So this entire piece is really focused around the de-risking component of oh, okay, hold on, I just put the chat up there, I don't want that. About the de-risking component of building a product. So we are focused on a digital product in this case, but many of these rules apply regardless of whether your product is physical or whether it's digital or whether it's some combined version therein. So again, looking at the list of attendees and the list of ideas that are sitting on the table, there's plenty of these that sort of shift between the physical form and the digital form. And just know that this is intentionally semi-generic with the goal of being able to provide you with tangible outcomes that you can then apply specifically to the problem you're trying to solve. So OCTO as an organization, we're based in Pawtucket. We've been in business for about 13 years. We have a pretty wide range of people within the company. Our company is very much built on this intersection between the physical form and the digital form engaging together into a single solution. So the vast majority of the work that we do is connecting the dots between the physical world and the digital world through some either emerging or existing technology solution that allows people to engage with a problem that customer is trying to solve in as fluid and seamless a way as is possible, given the constraints that we're provided by our customers. And I'm going to come back to that word constraints a few times during this presentation, because I am a very big believer in the idea that constraints are your friend, not your enemy. You need constraints. Otherwise, you have the ability to endlessly swirl around thinking you can do anything when the reality is you cannot. So we have built our practice on a philosophy of taking a multifaceted view at problems that we're trying to solve. Every one of the problems that sits on this piece of paper that I was handed lives within some wider ecosystem that you have to be aware of. And that ecosystem has a set of rules that you only control certain components of them. So the way that we approach a problem is to put the problem in the center of the center stage, and then begin to identify how that problem is influenced by a whole host of external forces that you don't always control, and try to build the broadest picture that we can as early as possible. And we're constantly changing that viewpoint to go into the product to define the details of that product, and then expand back to understand the greater context within it has to live. We work across a whole host of verticals. This integrated technology solutions, as I mentioned, is really this combination of hardware and software. We do a lot of work in the medical technology and healthcare space. Before starting this company, I spent 11 years working for the company called Item, which was the predecessor to Zymedica, which now just got sold and became Verinex like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago or whatever they changed their name. So that experience sort of comes with us. And we have quite a few people who are actually former Zymedica employees, especially on the software side. We do software that is standalone, so platform solutions, cross-platform products that live from mobile through desktop applications. We still do a bit of consumer brands, although that category for us is waning. And we do quite a lot in the brand experience space, which is a little less relevant to you, but does impact your the way that you tell your story ultimately leads to the ability for you to resonate with an audience regardless of the quality of your technology. So you can have the greatest technology in the world that does everything for everybody, and if you cannot articulate that story, no one will use it. So it's a very important attribute of this process. Us, like many other firms in our space, have a series of services. They look similar across the category, and really the services that we provide are more dependent on our experiences and our capabilities than it is about the specifics of the service that we or the title of that service. Okay, so I got through that as fast as I thought I could, 5 minutes. Okay, so the balance of this, which we have 47 minutes left, is to discuss this idea of de-risking. So we're going to kind of start with, what does de-risking even mean? It's a term that's widely used in the venture capital space. It's a term that's widely used in the medical technology space, and they have two totally different meanings. If you're in the venture capital space, de-risking is really about product market fit and financial de-risking of the strategy. If you're in the medical technology space, de-risking is about understanding your regulatory constraints and making sure you have de-risked the solution for patient experience or user experience. And what I mean by user experience, I mean whomever it is that is delivering or receiving that care has risk involved in using your solution, and you are trying to ensure that you have de-risked it such that you produce something that doesn't get somebody hurt, killed, sick by accident. So venture capital is going to look at it very differently, where they're really concerned. They are obviously concerned about not hurting or killing somebody, clearly, but they're also concerned about financially de-risking your idea such that your product market fit is defined, and that product market fit means their money is de-risked before it goes into your investment. So de-risking is on a very big sliding scale, and I have wildly oversimplified this for the purposes of speed. But if you imagine on the right, you work in a large organization that has a lot to gain or potentially lose depending on what happens, versus on the left side of this diagram, your office is a coffee shop and your business partner sits across the coffee shop table from you, and you are working on an idea in a very casual way. There's very different risk between those two entities. Conversely, or equally, if you take the application set that you're working in and you look at the risks of producing an application like Calm, which does not have to prove that it works, versus building a platform application that sits within a healthcare and hospital space or drives a device that's delivering care, the risk profiles between these is very different. So if you think lower left corner is your lowest risk in this graphic, upper right corner is your highest risk in this graphic. So everything we're going to talk about from here on is really contingent on understanding on where you live within this landscape, so that you're adequately defining the risk profile that you're trying to address as you go through this process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this. Okay, does that feel clear enough? I can't see anybody's faces, so I'm just going to assume you're all behind your cameras, like nodding your heads. Yes, of course, this is great. Thank you. This is the problem with doing these remotely, is like the audience, not seeing the audience makes this way harder. I lecture at RISD every Wednesday, and we're in person, thankfully, and now I'm eager to get our masks off so that I can see somebody like say something with their mouth while I'm talking, but we'll get there slowly. I think the first thing to understand at the beginning of all this is everything we're going to talk about is process driven. None of this is magic. There's a process and a methodology that you can go through to ensure that you've done the homework you need to do at the earliest stages that get you a solution at the end that allows you to solve whatever goal you've set for yourself or for the organization or for the product. So for the purposes of this conversation, we are going to focus entirely on the early stage of the process, because the vast majority of the de-risking work is done before you ever develop a solution. If you're in a de-risking scenario at the back end of your process, something is wrong. That just means that something got through the earliest stages, and now you're dealing with a problem that you really needed to have understood better and addressed right at the beginning of the process, because it's very expensive to fix problems after you've put the time and effort to either tool up code, build backends, build infrastructure. That is not the time to be doing your de-risking effort. So we're going to focus for this conversation at this earlier stage, and I've highlighted that with my very bright pink box so everyone can see it and no one can say they didn't know where we were. Okay, so we're going to take this through a series of what I hope are very tangible steps. And so this is the point at which if you have questions or you need clarification from here through to the end, please raise your hand or drop something in the chat. And as you can see, I can't see the chat. So Allison or Melissa can help me out once that occurs. Okay, so number one is to understand your audience. And we're going to make a distinction about who the audience is versus the user. An audience is the higher level umbrella of people whom you are trying to influence with whatever it is that you're bringing to the table. So for example, if you are building out a healthcare records software application, your audience is going to be healthcare providers, but your user is not defined by that global term, healthcare providers. Your user is going to be multifaceted because you'll have different types of people engaging with the application that you're trying to build. So first and foremost is to step way, way back and say, who's my audience? Am I targeting cardiologists? Am I looking at specific clinics? Am I looking at an NGO? Am I talking to a government? Am I talking about a healthcare provider? Am I talking about a clinician? Where am I headed with all of this at a very high level?
Justin,
And then,
we had a question come in, so I figure this is a good time to ask it. The question is about, is customer discovery, does that fall under user research as well, or are those different things?
So I'm lumping these two things together into this sort of discovery phase right? So customer research, user research, understanding your market and your audience, they are all interconnected. And the better you understand your audience at a very early stage, the easier it will be to identify your user. If you don't understand your audience, understanding that user base is very, very difficult. And we oftentimes make bad assumptions about who our user will be because we don't have a clear enough vision for the full scope of the audience. So we make a distinction between an audience and a user in that way. I think I answered that question.
I think so too.
So there's plenty of ways to get close to your audience. One of the easiest is joining groups in LinkedIn and being a part of that conversation within a very narrow user group or audience group that you can define through LinkedIn. Other ways are attending trade shows. Other ways are just picking up the phone and calling people whom you already know are a part of these different groups. That doesn't mean they're a customer. That just means there's somebody who you can start to glean information from and understand the landscape that you're eventually going to approach. I should have said something at the beginning, so I'm just going to back up here for a second. For graphical purposes, we put this together as though it is linear. The reality of what we're going to go through is very nonlinear, A, and B provides information that you're going to want to go back and recheck as you learn more about certain parts of your product or your project. So as you're traveling down this process, user research doesn't start and end at the beginning. User research has flowed through this early stage throughout your discovery process so that you're constantly checking your assumptions that you've made in the prior steps and ensuring that those assumptions are still accurate as you learn more information. Okay. So the next major component that we really need to get a handle on very early on is our constraints. We all have them. Whether we want to pretend like we don't or not is up to you, but you have constraints. Those constraints will be financial constraints. You only have so much money. You only have so much access to capital. You only have so much time, which is money. Your team or the team that you can access or assemble, which dovetails directly into your skill set. And these are sometimes hard to rationalize because, especially for entrepreneurs, especially for people in the very earliest stages, there's oftentimes this knee jerk to say, I don't have the money, therefore I'm going to build this myself. And while that seems like the lower cost solution in the earliest days, there is a ton of risk with that answer, because what will oftentimes happen is you will then no longer apply your own set of skills into the area where you are best suited. And that doesn't mean you need to pay people to build things. We have lots of ways that we can talk people into helping us. They are not always financial transactions. And so understanding what those constraints are and then the opportunities that those constraints present is a critical step to take a very deep dive into super early on. Your constraints are then going to change over time as you learn more, as you raise money, as you recruit more team members. The constraints will change, and constantly revisiting those constraints is an important skill to start to build super early in your process. At the same time, there is a landscape that needs to be well understood, and that landscape is multifaceted and can be quite complicated. In the medical technology space, owning your IP is quite critical to ensuring that you are able to protect your position moving forward. So that IP, that understanding of the IP landscape happens in two phases. And if you've sat through the IP component of this workshop, you're going to you got a much deeper dive into what I'm just going to say in 2 sentences. One, you have to understand whether or not you have freedom to operate within the space that you're working in, which means you aren't going to trample on someone else's intellectual property. 2, you need to determine if you have the ability to then carve out your own intellectual property that you can invest in and manage over time. This doesn't mean you don't have a business if one or the other doesn't work, but you have to be aware of what this landscape looks like at the earliest stages, so that you don't spend a bunch of time driving down a path that ultimately you have to reverse out of due to intellectual property issues. The same rules apply when it pertains to regulations. So if you know you have a class 2 medical device, you are going to set your entire process to allow you to achieve your go-to-market goals in line with that regulatory constraint. If you know you have to go through some ISO compliance, FCC compliance, CE compliance, understanding that landscape at the very beginning of the process is critical. I will tell you, it is really difficult for almost every founder that I've ever spoken to be able to go through this process alone, because you really aren't an expert in regulatory compliance unless you are an expert in regulatory compliance. Then you need help in other places. But if you're not an expert in regulatory compliance and you're not an expert in the various regulating bodies that exist within the market, you need to go get some help. So I have no idea if NEMIC is presented to this group. Good. Call them. They are at your disposal. They're here to support you, and they have excellent resources to help you navigate all of the things on this page. And I've worked with Aiden for a really long time, and he's got excellent access to knowledge that will provide you with the support that you need as it pertains to mapping the pitfalls that come with the various regulatory constraints. My thing just popped up a chat.
I was just going to say that NEMIC is actually speaking next week about pitching. So
okay, great. So NEMIC is a really good resource. If you don't know who they are, attend next week's and you'll hear all about them, and they'll tell you what they know without me. The pitch side of the NEMIC component is one piece, but their ability to support the regulatory requirements is really valuable. And they've got a great network of regulatory compliance experts that they can connect you with, and you can use those to go through the process that you're going through. Okay. So now we start to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty here. So understanding your users' unmet needs is the foundation for which you should build your product. There is the world is littered with startups with technology solutions looking for a problem to solve. And when you take that approach, we get asked, we get brought into projects at least once a year, where a client says, look at this amazing thing I can do. And we ask, who cares? Why does that matter that you can do this? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And making sure that you've flipped that question up on its head to say, okay, what's my user's unmet need? And then how does my solution fit within that problem set is a extremely critical step for you to take. And when you take that step, you have to be very honest about what you have learned through your user research. Because if you are, it's really easy for all of us to I have a slide later on, but I'll give away the punchline, which is to fall in love with our idea. And then you're starting to look for a reason why it's good. Instead of saying, okay, what's the landscape need? What's the market looking for? What's the user looking for? And how does my solution fit within that problem that they need me to solve? And that may require you to make changes to your strategy or make changes to your product as a result of what you learn. And if there's anything you should pull out of this exercise that you're going through over these weeks within this series of workshops or series of talks, is to know that you don't always have to be right, and you don't always have to have the right idea at the beginning. And being comfortable with listening to what you learn and making changes based on that information is only going to help you as you navigate the complexities of putting something to market. So I'm going to take a couple of steps here to go through some strategies that are a little deeper down for how you identify your users' unmet needs. So saying identify your users' unmet needs is like one of those umbrella statements, and everybody goes, okay, that's great, but like, what do I do? So we're going to start with mapping. And mapping is a critical step to do before you build any prototypes. Mapping can be done on a piece of paper. It can be done on a whiteboard. It can be done in a software tool. It can be done using Post-it notes. Mapping is an excellent first step into getting you a really clear understanding for the intricacies of the solution that you're trying to build. So I have pulled a generic map. We built this map. This is not a medical device, and this product is on the market. So I am comfortable sharing it. So what you're looking at is a complete process flow map. This is not every screen. This is not every step. This is outlining the fundamental workflows and actions that need to be taken in order for this piece of software. In this case, this is a piece of software with a piece of hardware connected to it. And so you can see in here, this is broken up into components. We've got admin, maintenance, system configuration, system operations in the middle. And then in this case, something called job template config, which is the way that we were creating, we termed it a job, which was really the action of the machine that we were controlling was defined as a job. And the process that we went through with this is we created this map with all of the engineers who are going to be involved in the project, all of the designers who are going to be involved in the project, as well as the product managers who are going to be managing the way that this product rolled out to market. And I think that's a really critical piece to keep in mind, is when you're going through a mapping exercise, the group of people who gets involved needs to be able to see the full scope of whatever it is that you're trying to deliver. If you map and you're just the engineer working on it, you will inevitably miss parts of the process that someone else who would look at this from a slightly different lens can provide you. So it is really important to make sure you bring together those people into a mapping exercise that can help you see the full context, so that as you build your map, it's as broad as it can possibly be. I will tell you, this map that you're looking at here, I have a photo, which I wish I had put in here. I should have grabbed it. I have a photo of the original map, the one that's not the finished map. And what we did is we printed it out. Instead of doing this on screen, we printed it out really big. And then we let everybody take a marker and write on it. And we ended up with Post-it notes absolutely everywhere and marker all over it. And it was a giant mess. And we rolled that thing up, brought it back to our office, and rebuilt the entire map. And then we took that rebuilt map, we put it back in front of that same group, and we said, okay, this is what you said last time. Let's just double check our work. And we made further notes and went through that process again. Well, if you think about what you're doing, you're really doing a little bit of user testing in there, because you do have an understanding for that user need at some baseline level, and you're able to really sort of charrette the process through this tool that's very simple and very time effective. Is that another question in the chat?
Yes, so if you could just kind of review a little bit of the information that's on the map that you're sharing, because it's a little hard for us to see.
Yep, I'm gonna go zoom in here. So this is a low res picture. But if you look inside of here, let's just start over with system config. So this just says, here's where we logged in. There's the start of the whole process. And if it's a first time that you're going in, okay, we need you to do some software installation. We're going to give you some codes. We're going to ask for some updates. We're going to go through a guided reboot. And once we've gone through a guided reboot, we're back to logging in. Now, once we log in, everything's good. Great. Well, let's go through our dash. Now our first screen is our dashboard. From within our dashboard, we can go to our user settings. We can schedule a job. We can manage jobs. We can unload drawers. We can manage results. We can manage templates, all from our dashboard. And that's all outlined. So if you see what I'm saying, where I'm saying this is not a screen, we're not drawing a screen. We're drawing a functionality of a screen. And then if I drill over, I can see, okay, if I want to go schedule this. So from my dashboard, I can schedule. Now I'm going to name it, choose a template, select a drawer. And now I'm getting into the weeds here of this process. And you can see at the end, okay, well, we had a question. How do they select a configuration? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were referring to the question in the chat. Another person was just asking if we would be able to have access to a map, PDF of this map after the.
I can't give you access to this map, but I can give you access to other maps without any trouble at all. Yeah, this one,
That's great.
I can share it, I can show it, but I can't give this away.
Sounds good. I will touch base with you afterwards so we can get something like that.
No problem at all. Okay, so step one is this mapping exercise. And step two then is to build a prototype of whatever it is that you are working on. So I'm going to show you, there's going to be split in this presentation. I'm going to show you prototypes at multiple levels. In this case, we're just going to start with some basics. So prototypes at the beginning really need to stay simple. The more complex your prototype, the closer it bleeds to a real product, the harder it is to be flexible and learn from it. So in the earliest stages, I'm going to use this prototype down here in the lower right as my example. That is a box cut out of wood where we put a hole where the screen went and we stuck a phone. A literal iPhone went into this hole, and these were where we had joysticks. This is a controller for a piece of equipment. And so you can see in the lower right that equipment, or that prototype, this prototype probably took somebody about, I don't know, 2 hours to build it. And we made something on the order of 30 or 40 of these over the course of a period of 15 days. And all we were doing was testing theoretical usability of the product. From a digital perspective then, what was on the phone is actually shown up here. And this is a wired prototype that was built in Sketch. And the goal here was, we want to have a digital interaction that we can get people to click on the screen so they can physically engage with the idea that we have. And we also want a physical object. We didn't want to do this devoid of the physicality of the object that they are also going to be working with. So we were able to do two sets of tests in one. We were able to understand, if we lay out buttons like this and we lay out joysticks like this, does this seem viable, yes or no? And then can you interact with the content on the screen? And too often what people do is they split this and they try to get software interaction separate from physical interaction. And the reality is every physical good with software on it has a connected tissue between the object and the software interaction itself. And if you separate those, you lose that learning very early on. And it's quite easy to connect the dots so long as you don't try to build a real product. You're just building a demo. So if you look down here in the lower left, you can see these becoming ever more complicated. This one here, which I couldn't get a great photo of, but this is actually a foam core mockup. There's a 3D printed mockup. There's another 3D printed mockup. Here is a working mockup with a Raspberry Pi inside. This is a production unit sitting over here. So you get this very natural progression from super basic to production. The same applies to software. You start simple, quick and dirty prototypes, and you slowly build those up to be more and more complex so that you don't design your way into a corner that you can't get out of. It is also really important to remember the prototype, the tool, sorry, doesn't make the prototype. You make the prototype. So here's a list of prototyping tools in the software space that people gravitate toward, right? Figma in the lower left being one of the more complex. Balsamic being one of the simpler ones from a software standpoint. The easiest one to do is just like draw it on a piece of paper, which is the lower right. Just a marker and some boxes can get you a really long way, really, really fast. In fact, if you go to this project here, the woman who is leading this exercise got into an argument with one of the engineers, It was a nice argument. It was pleasant, but got into a debate, a healthy, friendly debate with one of the engineers about the flow of creating this workflow that's quite complicated. And the way that the two of them ended up working it out was she just cut out a piece of paper and then cut out Post-it notes of different colors. And they played like a board game with how to do this process. And that is what drove us to this workflow that you see on screen. And that's everything you see down here in blue. The first version of that literally got built with just little scraps of paper and people moving the pieces of paper around, which then we embodied into a piece of software. So don't be afraid of really simple tools. They are really friendly. They go quick. They're cost effective, and you learn a lot really, really rapidly. Okay, so I'm going to just pause here just for a second. So we've now created a map. We've created a prototype. Now we want to go take those back out to our users, because remember, this is a non-linear process. We're going to be going around in circles as we learn. We're going to take those back to our users. And at some point, when we're actually showing them digital content or physical objects, we need to start to build some structure to the way that we communicate with them. So in the early days, you might be just in casual conversations. You're having a beer or a cup of coffee, and you're asking them questions and you're writing things down. What do you think of this? Where do you run into trouble? Why does this bother you? Pretty high level. But as you start to want to learn more and be more regimented, you've got to be disciplined with your user studies to a degree that is that allows you to compare results from one user to the next, despite the fact that sorry about my dog, I can't stop her. Despite the fact that they might come from very different backgrounds. The way that we do this is we always start with a discussion guide. That discussion guide this is not one of ours. I stole this off the internet because I can't share our discussion guides because they're always very confidential in nature. So I just ripped off, I don't know what Peppy Pod is. I don't have a clue. But what we do is we build a document that allows our researchers, so this is Sarah, this is a photo, an actual person in my company. She's actually got her discussion guide on that clipboard. This is an actual customer. So what we're doing is we are taking each customer through the same series of questions. We don't have to ask them in the same order. We can keep this quite conversational. We can bob and weave as they answer, and we can ask them to add to their answers in a way that gives us more granular information. But what we really need is to be able to get all of the same questions answered in the same way so that we can cross-compare information from one user to the next. So we use a combination of observational research and interviews. We will also conduct A/B tests. And then this, which you can see here, you're actually recording the person. See this little camera here is recording the person who's using the app. You're also recording what they're doing in the app. So we have had as many as 3 cameras running, one recording the person's face, one recording their hands, one recording the screen, while we try to, because people are going to say things, they're going to look places, they're going to do things that don't match one another. Happens every single time. So somebody's going to say, yeah, this is really easy. Watch, click, 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 click. And you're going to go, holy, you just took 6 clicks to make that happen. And the reason they said it was really easy is because they've done it before. That doesn't mean it's a good solution. That just means that they're comfortable with it. And so you're constantly trying to evaluate, okay, what did they say? And then what did they do? Because what you're trying to avoid is this. I love this video. So this is a beautiful set of slides put somewhere. And this is the perfect example of how users don't do what they say they're going to do. So here we have an excellent slide on some terrain that no one is using as a slide. The kids have all decided that the actual best part of this slide, the last one's my favorite. Look at this kid. That the actual best part of the slide is the ground below the slide. So you have to be really cognizant of your internal bias and understand that what people say and what they do are not going to match, and allow you to take in both pieces of information to help you create a solution that's going to deliver what you're after. Because no one who's interviewed realizes consciously that their actions and their words don't match. They always think that they do. And it's up to you to see how those are decoupled and then figure out how you solve for that problem. Okay, so we've gone through a series of steps. We've built some tools. We've gone back and forth with our user. And only now do we begin to have enough knowledge to think about building an MVP document. Oftentimes people try to build this MVP document really early in the process. And the reality is if you build your MVP document too early, you guarantee the fact you're going to rebuild your MVP because you're going to use it based on assumptions that aren't fully vetted and they aren't fully evaluated. And therefore you're going to struggle to create an MVP document that's meaningful. I find the term MVP to be very difficult. It's different for every solution. It's different for every product. If you're in the physical space, calling something an MVP, in my opinion, is an impossibility. You know, I'm just sitting here in my office and I've got this little pump, or I'm sorry, this little it's a air gauge for my bike. There's no version of this that's MVP. You either have it or you don't. So in software, we can use this term MVP because we can create an architecture that allows us to scale. We can create features that are able to migrate over time without backing us into a corner. But you have to be very critical of what MVP means at the very early stages, and you have to have enough inputs into this process so that you're able to provide an output that is truly an MVP. I like this because I grew up in Chicago in the 80s and 90s. This is the only MVP that I know. Michael Jordan is the ultimate MVP. Everybody else is just pretending. And your MVP documents are reliant on all of those things we looked at before. What are your unmet user needs? What are the skills that you have? How have those skills changed? What's your budget? What's your time frame? What did you learn from testing? What did you learn from your interviews? What did you learn from your own internal prototyping efforts? What did you learn from your architecture research? What did you learn from your technology stack research? And all of those answers have to get blended in to an MVP. So this comes back to this idea of don't fall in love, fall in like. I stole that from Danny Warshay, who all of you, if you don't know Danny, you should know Danny. He's a part of your organization. This is his new book. I'll just give him a little plug because I have a pre-copy. It comes out next week. Danny would be very happy if you bought one. It is very good. And there's an entire section about not falling in love with your own solution. And it's very hard to do. So I've launched multiple businesses. And the first one, I will tell you, there were signs very early on that we were in the wrong place and we should have exited that business very early. And we kept it for 7 years before we finally said, okay, enough's enough. And so falling in love is a big challenge. And then I'm just going to come back to this philosophy that we presented at the beginning, which I feel like I can't say enough times, is you have to be able to change the lens with which you look at your problem. Being able to see the details and the big picture is critical to being able to be successful with whatever it is that you're building. If you think about in your own lives, most people get annoyed with a product or a service because of something little. Like I got annoyed yesterday when the company coming to fix my refrigerator said they were going to come between between 9 and 1, and they showed up at 4. Like at the end of the day, they're going to fix the refrigerator. But the nuisance that caused because they showed up at 4 and their technology didn't tell me that. They didn't give me a text. I got no information. And all of a sudden at 4 o'clock, I get a text saying, hey, your service person's here. That's why I'm annoyed. They're probably going to fix my fridge and it's going to work just fine. And the service they provide will be reliable. So I'm annoyed by a little thing. Then you pull way back and you say, okay, well, if I don't fit into the economic infrastructure that exists in whatever market I'm in, I do not have a viable business or a viable idea to move forward with. So I always have to be able to shift this lens from big to small and back to big again throughout this process. Okay. I did it. I left 10 minutes. I've got a few specific examples that I want to walk through while we have the last few minutes to see this, and hopefully this helps add a little bit of context. That's why I'm sharing the whole screen and not just Keynote. So I've pulled some examples. I have to be very cognizant of confidentiality. So I've pulled some examples that are real projects that we have worked on to give you a detailed sense of how we do this in a way that doesn't then also violate any confidence of our clients. So I'm going to start here, which you can't see, but I have the Miro board open in the background. So this is another version of one of these mapping exercises. So the first one you saw, which was this one, looks like a flow diagram, right? There's a if this works, go here. If this doesn't work, go there. Versus this, which is really about workflows and usability. This is not a software map. This is a workflow diagram. This then becomes a software map afterwards. So can everybody see my screen still? Yeah, okay. So here is an MVP software map where we have a brief, and then we're literally going through what are the tasks at the top? What are the details at the bottom? Who's then responsible for doing those tasks? And you can see just how detailed all of this gets. And so we're now doing this not alone, but with our customer who is representing, in this case, the user. So we build this entire giant map of this application first. That then creates a series of screens that then are needed to digest what's on those other pages. And all of this is housed in a tool that we called that is called Miro, that we use very regularly to manage early days of software, because in here you're going to see all kinds of other nonsense that we can keep and capture all within this tool. So the first step is, what are you trying to accomplish? The second step is, let's lay all that out so we can all see it all at once and we can edit it before anybody puts any pen to paper to try to build any sort of screen. And these screens are just really gross mock-ups. None of this is real. This is just like icons on a screen. Like, okay, just chuck some stuff up there so that we can see it. I'm intentionally staying a little bit far away. So that is one way to do this. Now, this is then a testable idea that we can wire up and put into Figma and send a link to anybody we want, and we can get them to go through the process of using this software application. Or we can be really basic. So here's another example. I built this there's another question in the chat, it looks like.
Nope. You're good.
Nope. So I built this personally, so I'm quite connected to this one. I don't build these very often. And since I do not have the skills of my design team to go in and do this in Figma, I choose to build software prototypes in Keynote because I use Keynote a lot. So here is another way to do this. So I'm going to give you a little behind the curtain view. And then I'm going to play this full screen and you're going to see what this is. So you can see the screens, right? Tabs through just like it would if it were a presentation, right? That feels very presentation-y, but watch what happens when I don't let someone go through it that way. So now I'm playing full screen. Can you still see it? So now I'm going to sign in. And you can see, all right, over here, I've got pathways. I can go to this product here, but I can't do anything over here. There's nothing here. These are not linked. So I can say, okay, let's go check this product. And then let's go see what's going on behind the scenes of this product. And now I can, what do I want to do? I want to see a case study. No, I didn't want to see a case study. I want to see the ease of use map. And this feels like a software, right? Like that does not feel like a PowerPoint presentation. And all I did was make a PowerPoint presentation. And then I put clear buttons over it. And I mapped the entire PowerPoint to work like a piece of software. And so now what I have instead is a thing that feels like a real piece of software that someone can click through and say, oh, cool, thanks. I got it. Sent. And now I'm done. So you don't always have to revert to the most complex examples. You can do these in quite simple ways. So I'm going to go through one more. Oh my God, my timing is perfect. This is a 2-minute video. So this is another version. And I want to drive home the point that being physical about your demos and your ideas is really valuable. What you're going to look at here has a little bit of back-end code that lets us connect it in a local environment. It's not cloud-based, it's local only, and it lets us show this off at a trade show event. I don't know if you can hear any volume. Yes?
So now this is startup time. I'm with Cody Burke from Print Parts, and I've got a few questions for him. Hey, Cody, how is it going?
Doing great, thank you.
So Cody, when did it all started with Smart Parts, and what is it?
Yeah, so Print Parts is a production-focused service bureau. We're operating out of New York City. And as a production-focused service bureau, we're very close to our customers. And we know there's a lot of challenges as they move from prototyping into more production applications. And one of those challenges is traceability and material authentication. So we're introducing Smart Parts for the first time. and it's a new material authentication and part traceability platform for the additive industry.
And what's the technology behind smart parts?
Yeah, so the way we're doing it is we have a programmable material. And when I say programmable, I mean it's a particle that we can control certain characteristics to create a identification system. And we take that particle, those materials, and we embed those in additive materials, or we can apply them as a post-processing stage. And then that gives us the ability to interact with those particles with custom scanners and sensors that we're developing, and then connect that physical part to the digital manufacturing data.
What are the current target sectors for smart parts? And can you name maybe some of your customers?
Yeah, so we can't disclose customers at this stage. The target segments are really anything that has high requirements or certified materials. So you're thinking aerospace, defense, automotive, medical, we think will be a very big segment for us as well.
And where do you see smart parts in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to use this technology to introduce a new standard for the additive industry for authentication and part traceability. So, it's really important for us to be technology agnostic, and this is an industry-wide solution. So we're looking to partner with an ecosystem of partners from software providers, machine OEMs, to the material compounders, and then ultimately, all that value accrues to the end customer who gets full traceability, from material compounding all the way to part end of life from their parts.
I think you wanted to show me a little demo. Sure. Let's do
Okay,
it.
here's the demo.
Let's do it. So this is a demo of our smart parts platform. You can imagine this being a catalog of parts that you have registered into your system. So that I can take.
So that's an HTML page.
Our particle technology embedded in it.
It is not connected to the internet.
I can scan it with my handheld scanner.
That scanner's connected via Bluetooth.
All the manufacturing data associated with this part.
The manufacturing data that is displaying is fake.
Will pop up along with a chronological history of the scan events. So in a real world scenario, you can imagine I wanted to know who performed the quality control check on this part. I'd be able to scan the part and see that history of what's happened to this part.
Thank you very much, Cody.
So inside of that application, there's a pop-up that shows up.
To see you very soon, maybe next year at Form Next. Bye-bye, guys.
There's a pop-up. Oh, sorry, I didn't stop it soon enough. There's a pop-up that shows up. It gives them a bunch of data, but all that data is pre-populated and it's all fake. It's not connected to the internet. These guys, no, don't sign me out. These guys are just closing on a $2 million round. And that little demo is what they use to close their funding round. It sits on a desktop. You don't need the internet. You don't need connectivity to anything, but it's physical. You can see it work. Click the button, something happens, goes to the computer. They can do their explanation. In 5 minutes, an investor gets it. They don't need a complicated deck. They just bring that little demo and off they go. They raised $400,000 in seed money right after that event. They're closing on their $2 million round. They're supposed to sign on Friday. We'll see if it happens. So that's all I got. I'm 2 o'clock on the nose. Feeling pretty good about that. Any questions or anything that has popped up?
Doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat. Mostly just thank you. I know that we are at the hour, so I just wanted to say thank you so much, Justin, for this presentation. I appreciate you joining us for this seminar series. Thank you to our audiences for participating. We will follow up with access to the recording at the end of the seminar or at the end of the day. And we hope folks will join us for the next seminar, which is happening next week, but we will see everybody hopefully then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.